Hello, Chris here, one half of the Trope Stormers podcast. Just letting you know, the following podcast definitely contains massive spoilers, adult themes, and possibly bad language. Basically, all the good stuff. If that isn't your cup of tea, maybe give it a miss. You have been warned. Abandon all trope, all ye who trope storm.
We're recording. Do you want to kick off?
Can do, mate.
The narrative universe is in a state of chaos. Left unchecked, tropes have run rampant, leaving nothing but dystropia in their wake. All that stands in their way are two men in search of Utropia. Two men intent on slaying dead horses, exposing jumping sharks, and finding someone called Mary Sue. They are the Trope Stormers.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Trope Stormers 2021 in the distant future. I am joined very much in the present by my good friend and co-host all the way from that there London, Chris Jeeves. How you doing, mate?
I'm good, thanks, buddy. How are you? That was a lovely intro. You're coming through crystal clear as well.
What are we going to call our listeners that do exist?
You always say that like, they do exist. I've seen the numbers. We're not just shouting into the void. I don't know. They could be tropettes. Is that too gendered? Are we more in favour of non-binary branding?
Tropesters, trope noughts, trope.
Ooh, trope noughts. I like that. That's like a dreadnought. That's got
It
something.
implies adventure and sort of travel, a journey, doesn't it?
I like it. So trope noughts. I might write that down. Yeah, just come out the top of your noodle.
I may have adapted it from elsewhere, but yeah, let's for the purposes of the edit, let's say I came up with that.
Look, don't let the truth get in the way of a good story, Jim.
And speaking of good stories, we are here to do a job, aren't we, Christopher?
We are here to storm dem tropes. And what do we mean when we talk about storming dem tropes? If you aren't aware already, where have you been? Go back and check out some of our back catalogue. We've got some fantastic movies in there for likes of Jurassic Park.
Boy, do we.
Blade Runner, The Lion King. I mean, we're not picky. We really run the gamut. And for your listening pleasure, what we will do is we will dissect, pick apart, poke holes in a movie of our choice. And what we do is we look for tropes that are evident in this film. And tropes are narrative devices that they're meant to aid the plot, help it along. But sometimes they can be rather ham-fisted, cliched, corny, and badly used. So using our wholly unscientific scoring system, Jim, would you care to shed some light on that?
Yeah, so we're going to look at a film, sometimes a TV show, and we will look at them based on how well they have utilized the various story beats or indeed tropes involved. So it will have 4 tropes in total. Chris and I will talk about 2 each, and then we'll have to decide whether this film can be in the hallowed wealth of Utropia or it is condemned to the fiery pits, the Tartarus of film, Dystropia.
Oh, you don't want that. I mean, that's a tag you do not want. Yeah, it's a straight shootout format. So we do 2 apiece, as Jim said. So it's a best of 4. We don't do draws. We'll have an auxiliary trope to wheel out in that eventuality, and there will be a result one way or another. On that, you can depend.
Wow. And just to get, I mean, I've been watching something quite interesting, Chris. I don't know whether you've been paying attention to the sort of Netflix New Year's output.
I mean, if we're heading in a Love at First Sight Australia, I'm all about that.
I wasn't going to go there, to be honest. I was thinking more along the lines of the zombie flick. There's a really interesting take on the zombie genre that's just popped up on Netflix in recent months, and it's actually a Korean series called Kingdom. So it's set in like Dynasty Korea in the kind of
I've heard about this
Middle Ages, and it's fantastic. The first couple of episodes It's just absolutely blown me away in terms of the setting. You've got a real beautiful period-looking piece in the same way the sort of wushu type kung fu films, that kind of Crouching Tiger vibe.
Mm-hmm.
But there's very much this latent underlying horror story ready to unfold. I'm only 2 episodes in, but it very much sort of smashes through those kind of tropes of, teens or, your usual sort of American sort of post-apocalyptic setting, which would very much be in the kind of well-worn, hackneyed kind of tropes that you would usually get. So I'm not making a judgment just yet because I've only seen 2 episodes, but it's boding really well at the minute.
And since we've strayed into zombie territory there, a shameless plug here, dear listener, if you haven't ventured back already and aren't familiar with some of our back catalogue, not only do we tackle 28 Days Later, but we also talk about our favourite zombies in one of our Storm and a Tea Break mini podcasts. Check it out if you haven't done already. So
that leaves us with a film to Trope Storm. So what have we got and what are we dealing with for our first trope-tastic Trope Storm for our Trope Notes? I've gone a bit of tautology here, I'm afraid, but
I mean, I could jump in at any point and help you, but this is far too much fun.
Throw that life raft in and rescue me, please.
Come back to shore, sir. Don't worry. Okay, Jim. So the year is 1982. A fine vintage year for film. You got the likes of, I believe, E.T. came out that year. What else? Blade Runner.
This is BC, before Carlberg.
Right. Okay. Good. Not that your ego has anything to do with this.
No, the world does not revolve around me.
Clearly not. No, we're not all caught in your orbit, or your gravitational pull, rather, and we are satellites. So, the director of this movie cut his directorial chops with such films as Big Trouble in Little China, Escape from New York, Halloween, and Escape from LA, and the movie Elvis, a biopic of Elvis.
Fred Presley, not Costello.
I think that was an important distinction that you had to make there. This movie was elevated its star, Kurt Russell. I mean, he's the only real star in this movie. I've never heard of any of the other characters, and I don't think any of them really went on to anything of great note afterwards.
Wilford Brimley and Cocoon.
All right, fine. Look at you. You just pissed on my fire.
He's also famous for a health insurance ad where he says diabetes in a really sort of comical way.
Right. Well, without further ado, we are dealing with The Thing.
John Carpenter's The Thing.
John Carpenter's. Yeah, I noticed this. He likes to put his name on the credits. Like, we talk of ego, and it's always a John Carpenter production. These things, like, he has his name very prominently on the movie posters as well.
He was the black sheep of the Carpenters. He didn't go down the musical route.
He did the scores on the films up until this point.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Ennio Morricone did The Thing, but prior to that, John Carpenter used to do the soundtracks or the scores himself, and was known for his foreboding use of bassy notes, apparently.
He's also done a couple of video games as well, I remember. So he's kind of, I think he's a very kind of pioneer filmmaker in the sense that he tries to experiment with music and different genres and all those aspects of things like that. So yeah, he's quite an interesting character.
Yeah, he seems like it. And I mean, he got given quite a war chest to put this movie together. 1982, $15 million was not a small amount of money, and it was more than Friday the 13th got, which cost a mere $700,000, and Halloween cost barely $250,000. So by comparison, this has got quite a budget, and it shows in the amount of huge explosions that they set off.
Yeah, no dodgy William Shatner-based masks.
No Roman gladiatorial fighting against weird aliens and bedding the beautiful blue woman. Speaking of women, there are almost no women in this entire movie, so it's a massive failure on the Bechdel test there. Not that I think that this was a consideration for this film or in 1982 to great.
Well, we don't know what gender the eponymous creature in this movie is, do we?
Well, it doesn't have any dialogue apart from squealing.
Well, I could say something really sexist at this point, but I'm above that.
Fair enough. You've really grown as a person in this last year.
Yeah. So my hair at the minute, I've got like proper lockdown beard, hair. It's all. I'm feeling very much like one of the characters within this kind of Antarctic setting that they're in, which we should probably talk about really in terms of how it works in the film.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is meant to be set in very northern Canada, I believe, within the Arctic Circle. It was filmed on a series of sets in Los Angeles, and they refrigerated the sets down to 4 degrees, whereas outside it was over 38 degrees in LA. So imagine how weird that must have been, like walking into like a freezer or a fridge and then like wandering around in like sun-dappled LA.
In a parka covered in fake snow. It would have been quite a look.
There is a disturbance in the force. The Trope Stormers have a new website, tropestormers.com. If they could be turned, they would become a powerful ally. If they only knew the power of the dark side. Visit tropestormers.com. It is your destiny. There is no escape. Don't make me destroy you.
It's a funny old film. Like it's quite disorientating at first. Like it's a bit of a slow burner. Yeah, so it kind of starts heating up when a helicopter from the local Norwegian science team basically starts flying around shooting at a dog. Like they are hell bent on shooting this dog from a plane.
Going off at it like the Swedish chef. I've done a McCready there, haven't I? I've mixed them up. He actually mixes Sweden and Norway up quite regularly through this. Yeah, something like that coming from the helicopter. But you have this kind of crazed, rambling Norwegian running at this husky with a rifle.
Yeah, and then blowing up kind of out of nowhere. Like, did he mean to do that? I was a bit confused. Was he just being really careless, or do you think that was a premeditated self-immolation?
Well, I think it's a slight contrivance of he was the helicopter pilot, wasn't he? He tries to have they're quite a well-armed Antarctic station.
I mean, there's a hell of a lot of flamethrowers knocking about. It's almost like everyone's got their own. I wouldn't be surprised if there was a locker, and in that locker, everyone had their own flamethrower with their name on it.
Yeah. I never really thought about that. It's quite abundant, aren't they? But the grenade, maybe that makes sense. There's a lot of snow, there's a lot of stuff to melt around, but there's like rifles and grenades as well.
But it starts off like when they first encounter the thing, and it's like taking the dogs on and whatnot and being all weird. They kind of make a bit of a thing about go and get the flamethrower. And then it almost seems like half an hour later, it's just like, we've all got flamethrowers. Why did we have to go like send someone to go and get the flamethrower when, we've got a job lot?
It's an American base as well. The idea that they're well armed is probably not that weird.
Back to your hair and beard talk. I just saw in my notes that it took Kurt Russell a year to grow that beard. Do you think that's a year's worth of beard growth? Would you be happy with that amount of beard growth? Personally speaking,
that's a long way. I mean, he's quite he's like a gruff action guy, really, isn't he? Historically,
yeah, but I wouldn't say that was 12 months' work.
Snake Plissken takes 12 months to grow a beard. I'm disappointed, Kurt. I really am.
I think he could. I would expect better. I'd expect something approaching more kind of Castaway Tom Hanks for 12 months commitment to that.
Yeah, I mean Hanks. He's a very clean cut guy traditionally.
I know, that beard is shocking. There's things living in it. And not only that, Kurt Russell would have to have been knocking around LA all year with that beard. I mean, he is a very good looking man, so it probably didn't really matter.
Yeah, that's kind of toned down in this a bit, isn't he? Because I mean, he's the like you say, it's not a film where people are kind of like conventionally. There's a lot of sort of nerdy looking scientists and oddballs who are like the kind of core cast of this station, and they kind of. They're not the sort of typical archetype type kind of characters to be equipped to deal with what the film actually throws at them. So you've got this crazy Norwegian turns up, There's like a military type on the base, in the captain of the base, who dispatches one of these crazed Norwegians after the other one blows himself up with a grenade. And then you're left with this dog, aren't you? Which is then, as you said, put with the other dogs. And I guess this is where the kind of tide turns in terms of what it's quite a simple conceit in terms of the film, isn't it? You've got this really remote environment, which is quite typical of your kind of horror film genre.
It's quite desolate, isn't it?
Yeah, really desolate, around low communication, very rare that people come in and out. So when these Norwegian guys turn up and they're doing something like shooting at a dog, sets a few alarm bells ringing in both the sort of comfort of the characters, but also I guess the audience as well, because you'd never seen this film before, is that right?
Yeah, no, it's a completely new one on me, and I didn't really know what to expect. I didn't know whether this was going to be kind of just your typical horror movie, or if it was going to be, if it was going to be a bit trashy. I mean, I saw like the IMDb's and stuff, like the score was pretty solid. In case you're wondering, it clocks up an impressive 8.1 for a horror film, and my tipping point generally is 6.7 and above. I enjoyed this. I was impressed. I don't think it's dated too badly, apart from maybe some of the 80s computer chess game and cell modeling graphics.
It's interesting having someone approach this for the first time, because I really grew up with this, and it's one of those cases where my dad showed it to me far too young, and dear God, it is a visceral film, isn't it?
It definitely deserves the tag, horror, and some shock horror in as well, but also some sort of comedy horror, like the bit where the guy's hands get cut off. It's almost funny. Like, I laughed. I mean, I don't think that means I'm a bit sick and twisted.
Well, it was the first time I listened to the Trope Stormers podcast. I knew right there and then I had to listen to it some more. Y'all listening to Trope Stormers.
Let's start from the basis. It's called The Thing. This thing obviously isn't a dog that's been brought into the fold. And there's a really interesting shot where you're shown the kind of the dog has been given free reign of the station quite a while after it's been rescued from these Norwegians, or supposedly rescued. We see a silhouetted person in a room on its own. And a big thing about this film is this idea that this thing can become any one and any number of people at any one time, or that's what the scope of the imagination allows us to believe, because we're led to believe that this thing is initially killed by fire, because there's flamethrowers a go throughout this entire station.
And everybody knows, if in doubt, kill it with fire.
Yeah, so that, a big trope in itself, I suppose, is the idea that fire is the solution to everything in this.
Or better blow it up.
Yeah. There's a lot of explosives for a research base. I mean, I assume, based on what they do the rest of the time, they're just looking at like samples and stuff the rest of the time. Not like, I know they're Americans, but
I don't know. There's a lot of drinking J&B whiskey by the looks of it.
Oh man, the sort of Jim Beam, or was it Jim Beam or was it J&B?
It's J&B, but it's like an advert for the stuff. It made me want it.
It's the oddest product placement ever.
Yeah, and then it's kind of shameless as well. I reckon they might have funded this film. And if not, then they got, a real shot in the arm for their marketing people.
So you just there's the thing just has a tentacle around this film.
Yeah, I mean, the copyrights itself, doesn't it? Like, J&B, it's the best thing, and you could like play on that if you wanted.
Yeah, Coca-Cola missed out on the real thing.
There's a little rabbit hole that we fell down. So yeah, the thing itself, I mean, you never really know, you never see its sort of true form. It's kind of, I don't know if it's a pathogen or a virus, or if it's kind of a parasite of some sort, but it basically, when it gets into a host body, it copies it and just takes over, replicates it, but becomes not what it was. So if you're a human and the thing infects you, as it were, it will go through a transformation process where it basically copies all of your cells and atoms, but you cease to be what you were originally, the human, but you look like a human, sound like a human, and you have all of the knowledge of that human, but you are a thing. I think that covers it.
Yeah, and then that manifests itself in we don't hear any dialogue from this thing. We don't.
It squeals. It squeals.
It's not in the sense that you would, typically have a kind of. Of course, it's an antagonist because it's trying to, it's trying to basically do the whole replace the entire human race unsaid, and that's what little Wilfred Brimley's experiment. He finds out what the thing is trying to do, or what he thinks the thing is trying to do, because it replicates Bennings overtly, who's one of the sort of mild-mannered scientists, and it really does a number on a lot of the other members of the team, because I think there's about 7 or 8 different members on this base, and they all react in very sort of different ways to this first replication, and then from on that point on, it then becomes a case of. Because this is based on a story, isn't it? A science fiction writer, John W. Campbell Jr., called Who Goes There? So the minute you find out about this kind of, it could be any one of us kind of thing, that then sows the seeds of suspicion amongst the different members of the team who, don't want to be replicated. And even if they have been replicated, they wouldn't know because they believe themselves, want to pass themselves off as humans. So you have this really interesting kind of unseen threat a lot of the time, which then makes itself explosively. And we talked about how funny that scene is. There is a lot of dark humor in this at the same time. There's the idea of there's something when the Wilfred Brimley's character who goes crazy at one point because he just he doesn't trust anyone anymore, and he finds out what's going on. He kind of goes crazy quite spectacularly, and he's there in isolation on his own, eventually locked up because they lock him away. But then you've also got the instances like with that pretty sick part with the head that comes off the.
Is that when it sort of like grows little legs and scuttles off?
A head with these like grotesque boggly eyes, like growing out of the chin, and I think Parker, one of the characters, goes, "You gotta be fucking shitting me." And then, but alongside that as well, you've got the kind of pinnacle of the kind of grotesque comedy nature of that is one of the greatest scenes I think in sort of horror, which is the blood test.
That's so tense.
And one of the sound effects that's through it, there's barely any music or sort of background. You just hear this blowtorch just sounding all the way through it, and then there's these individual like scratches as it goes on the little petri dishes of blood, which they're taking blood tests from each of the people to see whether they're the thing or not. And even then, in that situation, there's comedy that's drawn from that, albeit very bleak and very dark, because there's just that much death and that much suspicion. It kind of creates this real perfect environment, a distrustful, quite bleak horror film.
There's a lot of sort of paranoia and anxiety and suspicion, and makes for a sort of tension that you get, I think, in slightly higher brow horror movies. It makes me think like, in Alien, where you don't see the alien for the first hour or something, and then even then you only see snippets, and it plays into sort of, you're using your imagination to fill in the blanks, and it's infinitely scarier because it's putting you in that position. Yeah,
it's a bit related to the kind of show don't tell, isn't it? Show the reaction to the characters, show the situation that the consequences that they're in, rather than this is a big boogly-eyed monster that looks horrible, and that does happen, but it's a lot more suspenseful than that for seeing less of because I don't know what the runtime of the kind of appearance of the creature is, or the virus or pathogen or whatever you chose to delete as applicable with it, but it doesn't appear an awful lot obviously it's there all the time if it's supposed to be taking the form of someone else, but I suppose that's the clever bit about it, is that it literally could be anyone at once.
It's hiding in plain sight for a film when various characters are the thing.
So who is because one thing about this is that it ends rather bleakly, doesn't it? Really, there's quite a bleak ending to it. So various members of the crew of the station have been either out as the thing and then burnt to a cinder, taken out the thing itself, and you're left with this interesting scene at the end where what has the thing been trying to do? Because does have its own agenda. It seems to have a sort of intelligence.
I mean, it just seems hell bent on just assimilating as much life as it can. It just seems to want to continuously replicate itself by taking over other living organisms, I guess, until there's no living organisms left that aren't thing. I mean, I don't know what its master plan is beyond that. I mean, they find the spaceship, don't they, out in the when they go looking for the Norwegian base camp, and they see, based on video tests, what the Norwegians have been up to, and they go and investigate it. It turns out to be a giant spaceship buried under the ice, which is obviously where the thing came from originally. Also, isn't there a like bad scene where there's actually like a flying saucer going past Earth and it sort of crashes into Earth?
Yeah, it's kind of that situation of the when we talked about Predator once upon a time, where almost sort of, you didn't need that necessarily. The Predator does it. It shows this spaceship, so that you're dealing with like this alien force. Where I think as if they took that out, maybe I don't think it would add anything or take anything away from the film, particularly if that wasn't included. It's just very overtly obvious that you're dealing with the title of the thing and then this thing from another world, and it is based on I guess in that sense, because it is a reboot. This or based on a film called The Thing from Another World in 1951, takes place in the same sort of setting. So I suppose in that sense, they needed to give some kind of nod to the original, and in making sure that it kind of fit that idea of a proper reboot. But yeah, there is that, by today's standards, it's a pretty ropey looking spaceship that gets shown fall into Earth.
It is a trifle unnecessary.
Right. So we're kind of skirting around these ideas a little bit. Shall we get into the tropes and how they work in the film itself? Because there's a lot to unpack here.
Mm-hmm.
Well, looks like it's time for Chris's first trope.
You wanted to talk actually about the kind of the alien, the concept of the alien itself, because we've kind of talked about how it's this kind of massive viscera, or it's a virus. It's this kind of largely absent force. But like, how does it play out in terms of what we understand to be? We've talked about the spaceship and what the conventions of like an alien, but you had some interesting thoughts, I think, on that.
Yeah, I mean, I got thinking kind of about alien form. So how aliens are sort of characterized in most movies. And it kind of falls quite neatly into two camps, as I sort of see it. You have often framed in a very human convention. So you got in like a humanoid form. So K-Pax, if you've seen that.
The Kevin Spacey, that? Yeah.
That's it, the Kevin Spacey one. And that actually is addressed in the film when he's like saying, "Oh, I'm K-Pax, I'm an alien from another planet." And I think, the whole film is about whether this person is an alien or is just mad. The government guy who actually says to him, "Well, you look like a man." And he sort of looks at him slightly different. He's like, "Most of the universe looks like this. This is the optimum form for people of this planet class based on gravity and other factors," which is quite an interesting, like when you add it, humanoid biped form being the optimum sort of. It's a classic. It's a design classic. Everyone loves that. But you've also got like the man who fell to earth, the faculty.
Makes you feel better about yourself, doesn't it? That
it does. Makes me. Yeah, it doesn't feel like we're pond life in the universe.
And I'm back down there.
There you go. Then you've got things like Star Trek, where I think it was maybe limitations of budget in like the William Shatner ones, where there was like a green woman or a blue woman.
Blokes with a pasta on his head.
You work with what you've got. So it's kind of blurring the lines a little bit with humanoidness, or they sort of blur it with like in Star Trek. Who is it? Captain Antilles, who's kind of like a humanoid lobster.
Oh, okay, yeah, they're usually like a sort of animal version. Is it? Like
They've been anthropomorphized.
like
if that's the right word.
Akbar, Admiral Akbar in Star Wars. He's just like a Mon Calamari. They're all just like fish people, aren't they?
Yep, that's the one. Yeah, and Greedo and things like that. Or they're kind of more monstrous. And sticking with Star Wars, you've got the giant slug of Jabba the Hutt, for example. Or the alien in Aliens is kind of like a weird lizardy reptile with acid blood. And Predator, as you rightly pointed out, was just a big bloke with a crab stuck on his head. And dreadlocks.
Don't forget the dreadlocks. That's an important part of it.
Don't forget the dreadlocks. In District 9, they're kind of
fucking prawn.
Yeah, fucking prawn. Yeah, they're kind of like fish people, prawn people. So no, I was kind of interested in this idea of kind of what are the limitations of the portrayal of an alien character, because they're often very rooted in real earthbound things, whether they are human form in some way, whether it is a humanoid version of like a hybrid, like with a lizard or a fish or something, or if they're just like taken to an extreme, like in sort of just a very monstrous form of something very exaggerated, like something from the deep ocean floor or something like that. And it's kind of like they're often grounded in the realms of what we can imagine, like our comprehension as people, like the limits of our imagination. And what I quite liked in this was there was an alien form, because we've got the awful but as we've said so far here, we never actually see it in its true form. It's a guessing game as to who is the thing at any point. The only thing we see is when it's kind of between forms, whilst it's assimilating a dog or a person or whatever, and it hasn't finished it. It's kind of this weird halfway house, monstrous, grotesquely sort of distorted form. Often then gets set on fire by an explosion or a flamethrower. And I just thought as a vehicle for the alien, it was quite interesting because like in Aliens, it plays on the fear and the paranoia and this idea it could be any one of us and that we never really know who it is or what it wants. I guess the only thing you could say that we know for sure about it is on the amazing 1982 graphics of the cells gobbling up other cells in some sort of weird Pac-Man-esque way.
Wagga, 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 wagga. It is let down by some 80s isms in this film slightly, but the point of it being kind of this nebulous, nondescript thing, we don't really truly know whether it has a true form, whether it's a cell, a bunch of cells. Half the time resembles just like some kind of inside-out dog with loads of tendrils and green shit spurting out of it. I think that's quite a deliberate thing, isn't it? Because it's this idea that a lot of the time when we read stories, for instance, or we listen to stories in oral tradition, a lot of description kind of forms the shape of what things look like. And things like Alien, which you mentioned as an example, they only seem to show half the creature at any one time. It's like the shadow with an outline of a head, or in Predator, which we've mentioned, even though it is just a wrestler with a crab on his face, you are shown sort of blurred, kind of, because it's got like the stealth camouflage. For lots of that, you don't see what it actually looks like. So this is a thing that's done a lot in other films. But they kind of go to the nth degree with this, I think, in the sense that you just this thing just is, that it has no design other than what we can disgustingly contrive from the situation. If it's going to take over a load of dogs, fine, we're going to have a load of bloodied half dog, part weird Venus flytrap looking things as part of this scene. Why not? And you can tell. There's a special effects department here, had a lot of fun with it, especially when you think about like the big chest opening scene and things like that.
And like, doesn't the dog's face like peel open into four, like one of those weird things in Half-Life, a video game.
Yeah, God, it's very unnerving at times. Some of the things that happen, and it actually holds up quite well in terms of some of the practical effects, I think. There are other things, like there's a bit of stop motion a bit later on, but even then you see like a weird hybrid of all sorts of different things that can just seemingly create mass and matter at any particular given moment. So you don't really know what's gonna, somebody will either get offed in an explosion and a mass of tentacles, or it'll literally be a case of just being touched by something resembling a human being. And I suppose that's the other thing, isn't it? Is that it can resemble humans. Therefore, even when you've got something as simple as dialogue, the sort of presence of the monster and the fear of the monster is always there. So yeah, it's a really interesting one to try and tackle, because aliens. What makes me laugh is when you get like this fish-headed beast from the other side of Alpha Centauri, but it's just like some normal guy with a British accent in lots of other different stuff.
Always had a British accent. One thing that just popped into my mind about this as well was we never really know what the transmission is. How does it pass from person to person? It's not ever made explicit, is it? Like, it's not like they get something squirted at them, or they get stabbed with something that injects them with something, or it's purely just touch or the air that they breathe. Like, it's never really made clear what the transmission is, because it transmits pretty easily.
Yeah. There's one bit where I forget the name of Wilford Brimley's character, but he's kind of one of the more sort of chief scientists. There's ones that get off pretty quickly. I think there's Bennings is one of them, and then there's another one who's got a German name, but he gets off pretty quickly. He like sort of goes out and his clothes are burnt, as if he's burnt himself. But we never know whether the has like set that up, and he's just going about doing
evil things
in the cold, because it can seemingly sustain. It doesn't have the limitations of a human. It can look like a human being, but it would be able to survive the temperatures. And the only thing it doesn't seem to be able to survive is fire, just like humans are, I guess. When somebody leaves a room or they disappear off screen for a long period of time, a large assumption is that they are one or more of the thing, perhaps.
It's time for Jim's first trope.
And that leads us quite neat. I'm gonna do you a little intro here, Jim, for your trope. If we were to imagine ourselves on this desolate wasteland, you might say that we're caught in a trap and we can't break out.
Right? Yeah, I'm with you. Why can't you see?
Well, what are you doing to me?
Yeah, exactly. We can't go on together, Chris.
Not with these suspicious minds.
And that is exactly the tee-up I needed for this trope. Yeah, it's this idea, isn't it? It's this idea that it could be any one of us. Go on together with suspicious minds. And this is exactly, things go to shit off the back of this. There's some real antagonism between certain sets of characters. You've got ones like Knowles, who's the chef on roller skates, and Windows, who's like the communications guy. And they're kind of caught between some really quite strong characters. So you've got Captain Gary, who's the captain of the base, he gets sort of less and less in charge as sort of MacReady increases his sort of role, because he keeps quite together throughout all this. He's the one who administers the blood test. The head scientist in Wilford Brimley has lost his marbles, and eventually he disappears. And then there's this real kind of head-to-head that happens between Childs, who is the another strong character on the base, played by Keith Davis. Got an amazing voice, and he's just there as this kind of relentless cynic, or sort of, I guess he's like a sort of secondary antagonist to MacReady. I gather at the start they're all supposed to be like friends, or at least colleagues that respect each other.
Well, they probably spent quite a lot of time on this base, just hanging out, playing chess video games. We haven't touched on the fact that Kurt Russell loses his shit and shoots a video game just because he loses.
He does. He shoots a video game, which doesn't suggest that he's leadership material. He also, quite early on, he ends up getting accused of being a murderer, because Clark, who is the dog handler, goes for him with a knife, doesn't he? ends up with Kurt Russell and McCready defending himself, to which then Childs says, I guess that makes you a murderer because he's killed a human. Yeah, there's lots of these little bits that sort of chip away at the various characters. It builds up to the ending point where there's those two characters left with Childs and McCready. And this is a very, very highly talked about scene and well discussed by many a YouTube video and particularly film fan. And I wonder what you think about this, Chris, in terms of the ending, because
hit me up.
Kind of this, we've got this. It'll lead on to my other trope, I guess, a little bit better, but we can kind of blend them together because there's a lot of crisscross with this film. Everybody's suspicious of each other, and particularly throughout, you've got Childs and McCready, and they're the two characters left at the end, kind of staring, looking at each other, looking into the void around them and the fire and the cold. One interesting thing about this is that there are no survivors, or we're not led to believe that they are in a position where they're not shown to die, but they're in a position where
they're not going to survive. Like there's like howling wind, snowstorm, like they're going to die of exposure. They've basically blown up the entire base, and there's nothing near them. There's no helicopter to escape. Theo's gone, and not that anyone was listening anyway. And neither man knows whether the other one can be trusted.
Yeah, so it comes down to this really quite bleak ending where we know that we leave these characters in distrust. They've probably made the right call overall in terms of not trying to escape or attempt to kind of escape, because we know that what's at stake in terms of humanity and the idea that this thing's going to replicate us all.
But shall we bookend the suspicious minds trope? We now segueing into the ambiguous ending.
Well, how about that? It's Chris's second trope. Thank you for listening.
Do you want to talk a little bit about that? We've got this kind of ambiguous ending. We've got this kind of, it's a bit of a play on the idea of the lone survivor, because we've got an ambiguous ending where we don't really truly know what happens. It's got this kind of sort of Inception vibe to it where the little dreidel's still spinning, and we're left to kind of fathom what's happened in this situation or what's going to happen. And then that it just leaves us with those nice bassy notes just sort of fading to black. And we're talking about inappropriate credits music, wouldn't we? If Suspicious Minds had kicked in at that point.
Which one would you go for, though? I think we talked about this before we were recording, but would it be more inappropriate for it to be the Elvis original, or would it be better for it to be the squealy 80s beauty that is the Fine Young Cannibals?
I think, yeah, it would definitely be FYC.
FYC, okay, fair play. I think the sort of the pace, the tweeness, and the sort of slightly minimal production of Elvis's one might be more jarring, but the sort of the jaunty, upbeat 80s lushness of Fine Young Cannibals in its own way would be jarring too. Dear listener, if you have any thoughts on that, please let us know. Right, where were we? Ambiguous ending, yes. I did get to thinking about this, about films that do have an ambiguous nature to the ending, and I'm just going to throw some at you here, Jim, and see what your thoughts are. Starting with a film that we've covered on this podcast, Early Doors, we did this, and this one's contentious because we talked about this film having like 7 different iterations, and the original director's cut is an ambiguous ending. I'm talking about Blade Runner, whereas the cinematic release had a different ending where it was pretty definite what happened.
I was between that and Point Break.
Is there any ambiguity at the end of Point Break? Oh, I guess it is. Does Swayze kick the bucket? Does he survive the monstrous wave? There's no body.
True.
Keanu isn't sticking around to find out. Yep. So Point Break, Inception, which I can't watch without someone basically explaining to me what's going on throughout the film. That, yeah, like we mentioned before, there's the ambiguity there. American Psycho, did it happen?
That's kind of any of it. Is any of it real? or not, isn't it? Because there's various bits throughout that where you kind of like there's a lot of ambiguity.
The shinning. By that I mean the shining.
Yeah, not the medieval sport of
What, kicking each other in the shins until the death.
that might not mean a lot to listeners across the globe, but in the Middle Ages in this country, we used to have a delightful sport called shin kicking, which hasn't carried on, thankfully.
I can't tell if you're joking or not.
No, we definitely did. We definitely did. You know?
Wow, things were bleak in medieval times, but shin kicking was a sport. Knowing us, and for those ill-informed and can't tell from our accents, we're British. Wow, how bad were things that we just kicked each other in the shins? That was probably our national sport.
It's a good job we didn't get the Americans or the Australians to get hold of it, or the Germans.
Oh, yeah.
They would just beat us at it.
I mean,
on penalty kicks.
I mean, Braveheart would have been a very different film if it was just shin kicking.
Oh.
Do you think he would have put the blue and white paint on his shins, and that would have been the thing?
Yeah, just the freedom speech, just with a close up of the shins. That would have been.
And lastly, on the ones I thought up was the Blair Witch Project.
Oh yeah, the podcast. Yeah, I was going to go for that. Yeah, because that's. I mean, I don't know whether I like that film or not. I'm in two minds really about it. But I think the ending's really good.
Serious hype created. Possibly one of the greatest PR campaigns of all time.
TikTok now, it's sort of thing that just appear on TikTok in like a 10-minute.
Yeah, but this was kind of dawn of the internet becoming widespread. And I remember being at school and there was proper like debate as to whether this was actually a real film or whether it was a tape that got found and edited together. Like, they really went to town on this it was almost like less information is more, because they gave away very little about what this film was about.
I think the thing, if you could, because if we do a reboot, could do a found footage reboot of this, couldn't you? It might be quite interesting to try and...
Of the thing?
Yeah, I think there's some legs in that. If you wanted to tackle it, because there is a sequel to this, or a prequel, which is part of the reboot and reason we did this, which is an interesting one to talk about, because it kind of makes the sort of ambiguity of the Norwegian element of this less kind of vague. But in terms of the ending of this film, because that kind of leads into the start of this film, and then the ending of this film is who are one or both of these men the thing at this point.
Bundled up in that ambiguity are also a couple of unsolved mystery films, which are also never solved. They're kind of posed quite subtly. For like the first one being like, who sabotaged the blood samples? Like, that's never explained. The ones that are kept in storage, and they narrow it down to suspects, but they never know who actually did it. I mean, it was obviously the thing, but who was the thing? Which character was the thing that did it? Or was it actually a human gone mad done it? And the other mystery, obviously, which is where we're at with the ambiguity and the suspiciousness of the ending, is the mystery of whether or not Childs, when he went missing, became the thing, is a thing, or if they're both human at the end.
Yeah, because there's a lot made of, like, they've looked at how these characters, if they were human, what would they actually do? So there's throughout we're shown these bottles of J&B quality whiskey. Other whiskeys are available, but we're shown how they're used as petrol bombs throughout, and at the end they share a bottle of this or a liquid inside this J&B. And one big theory that I've out is that idea that the thing drinks. The Child's thing, if we're going to call it that, takes a drink on this petrol bomb without realizing what it is. Therefore, the theory is MacReady knows that he's alone, as near as we're going to get to a survivor in this. And also, there's a lot of people that comment on the idea of the breath, the idea that there's breath on MacReady, but not breath on Childs. Therefore, that sort of proves that he's the thing. But like you say, we're never overtly told a lot of these things. And even then, they're just kind of fan theories or internet critic theories.
You've obviously had a lot more time to dwell on this, since this is part of the canon of your upbringing, and I'm still fairly new to the thing.
I've seen this about 7 or 8 times, so like it kind of, you do notice things each time, like
Does it reward repealing? Because I'm always, once you know, like there isn't a huge twist in this per se, but is it rewarding? Like, do you get more from repeated viewings?
I would say so, because like you know the rules of the organism, or by the time you get to midway through the film. So if you rewatch it again, you kind of know, okay, it only imitates organic matter. So then you start watching people's clothes change and things like that. And anytime anyone has a change of costume, you start thinking, hang on, what's going on there? Or it could just be that they've changed their pants because they stink. It could
equally plausible.
I think that's kind of there's a lot of people put a lot of stock in knowing answers to things, don't they? Like, who's this character really? Who killed this person? Who shot JR? All that sort of thing. It's that kind of there's a lot of hunt for certainty and hunt for truth in a lot of these sorts of narratives.
Also, you've got the weird spider head crab thing to look forward to.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't know about what you thought, but when that chest opened, how did you respond when that happened?
It was pretty grim. I mean, there were some bits that sort of turned my stomach a little bit, and then, like we said before, when the guy's hands get chopped off, I was laughing. So it's kind of in parts both like darkly grotesque, but also quite humorous at the same time. Like there's an element of brain dead about this.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of spraying and a lot of physical like effects rather than anything. Which I think that's what the prequel film is let down by. Because they originally they said they were going to sort of do what Carpenter did in terms of the practical effects for this, but it kind of got a bit of a CGI kind of mess towards the end. I mean, I quite like that film. I think it's worth checking out just to get a bit of. This is quite an interesting story and concept and universe to try and explore a bit further. One of the things that works about this so well, I think, and we'll not let that colour the trope storming, but is the kind of deliberate ambiguity.
So I think that leaves us with one final trope to storm. We've kind of overlapped and dovetailed a little bit and kind of done these both together. So we could hold hands and do this last one together if you like.
Oh, that'd be nice, in the spirit of, unity, which seems to be a buzzword that seems to be happening around at the minute.
Now, Jim's second trope.
Okay, so let me set this one up for us. Do you think there's a character in this film who, from the very beginning, you're fairly certain they'll be with us at the end?
Yeah. Well, it'd be hard to say anything other.
If you were a gambling man and you were to put up a whole English pound on it, who would you put your pound on?
I would put it on Mac.
Kurt Russell?
Yeah, Kurt Russell.
When I first saw his name when I was doing the research, obviously I hadn't seen this film before, so I misread it and I thought his name was Mac Reddy. I didn't realize it was McReady. I was just like, they called someone Mac Reddy. What the fuck is this film about? So when you asked me like what I thought it was going to be like, I was like, it's a pretty stupid name. I think this might be dumb.
He's Mac Ready to go rock steady. Yeah.
Well, I thought he was just like, maybe he was like an action hero sort of lead. Mac Reddy. Yeah. Send for Mac Reddy.
Yeah, Kurt Russell. When you see Mac Reddy, I'll get that. Obvious link to make.
Yeah, so you're putting your bets on a whole pound on Kurt Russell to be here at the end.
Yeah, I think so. It's
you wouldn't have got good odds for that because it seems it's obvious, isn't it?
Yeah, it does because we get through his eyes. I know it darts between characters, but we very much see the revelations. When we. Certainly when he goes to he takes the chopper flight to the Norwegian base, we kind of know by then, okay, we're kind of seeing this from Mac's point of view in a lot of ways. And when he's got time in his own little hut, and then he kind of takes charge, doesn't he? So yeah, he's even though we're spending equal time with these characters in the sense that they're all trapped on this base together and we're kind of trapped there with them as the audience. Yeah, Mac it's no surprise by the time we get to the end and he's dishing out his bottle of J&B to child's thing or human child's or whatever you want to call it at this point. Yeah, that's we know we're going to see this through to the end with Kurt Russell.
You would have got really good odds on Childs, by the way. You would have got long odds on that one.
Yeah, exactly. With the old trope of the black guy dies first.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad you said it rather than me. But yeah, you would have got, your pound would have come back multiplied.
We're a trope podcast. It's fine.
It's almost like they're wearing red on an away mission in Star Trek, isn't it? It's basically, I'm dying, aren't I? I'm out. I'm not coming back. The weird alien thing's going to latch onto me, and I'll be the first one to die.
It's interesting actually because the other black character, Knowles, who's the roller skating chef, we don't find out where he goes either. He's there at the end, and then we assume that Wilford Brimley has got him, but he kind of dies. He dies off screen. Or disappears off screen.
So, I mean, with the whole Kurt Russell, the indestructible star, I mean, at this point in his career, it's still fairly early. And it was, I think we were discussing this before recording, that John Carpenter cast him in Elvis, the biopic movie, what turned out to be a massive success. I think it was originally like made for TV movie, but was really successful. Apparently it's decent. I haven't seen it. And obviously cast him in this. So his star was in the ascendancy for sure. Whether in 1982, Russell was a household name, I'm not sure. The point I'm making is like, would you in 1982 have thought, oh, Kurt Russell's definitely going to be at the end of this. He's the star. He's the big name. This is pinned on. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm guessing it's because it's a classic movie for us. We know we've seen him in, all sorts of stuff since. We kind of know what star power he has. So, I mean, at the time, if you're looking at this with 1982 eyes, this is sort of is this pre Big Trouble in Little China? I think it is, isn't it?
I think it might be, yeah. I think it's also pre Escape from Insert City here.
Yeah, Escape from New
Angeles.
Yeah, it's an interesting that one. It's one to consider, isn't it? Because you kind of know if the Rock's going to be in a film, he's going to see it through to the end. You
say that, but have you seen Doom?
Oh yeah, well I have actually. Yeah, that one with that excellent first-person shooting bit in it.
It's fantastic.
Replicates we need to do a video game movie or a video game or something in the near future. It might derive some inspiration from a film like this, but that's a rough watch. That.
I mean, I see Doom and I raise you for a Super Mario Brothers film.
You're on.
And Sonic the Hedgehog. This could be an episode all of its own, and should be.
This is star at Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones, and sharp, immortal actor Sean Bean. And you're listening to Trope Stormers, you bastards.
Right. Well, speaking of episodes and culmination of them, what we need to do is we need to trope storm this damn thing.
Mm-hmm. We need to make some big decisions.
Yeah. I mean, that was a spaghetti junction of discussion there in terms of it's not as clean cut, I don't feel, as previous entries that we've had in terms of what constitutes what. Let's think about your first, just to keep it structured. We'll think about the alien or the organism or whatever we want to put on it. How are we going to score that? Because in terms of tropes, the idea of an alien being a baddie is pretty, it doesn't really speak. It's just a monster. It's a pretty hackneyed trope. Aliens are quite an easy sort of go-to as a baddie or an antagonist. And this is portrayed as in a very sort of, is it evil? I don't suppose you can say it is, but it definitely isn't a force for good, right?
No, I mean, it could be sort of it could be following its nature, couldn't it? Like that's what it was designed to do. That's just, it can't outgrow what it is, which is a monstrous replicating machine. And yeah, I guess when you paint it like that, Jim, I mean, it sounds terrible. Oh, these poor aliens. Why are they always depicted as doing bad things? Why don't we ever see it from their point of view? Maybe he was just trying to be friends and he has a weird way of showing it. Maybe that's how they do things on its home world. I mean, I was coming at it more from kind of, I appreciated the imaginativeness of the ambiguity of what it really is, and the fear that kind of and tension that arises from that, as a sort of a good tool in the sort of horror canon, creating the suspense and the unknown and the fear of the unknown. But yeah, when you put it in your terms, it sounds bad.
So it depends on what sort of lens you're looking at it through. I mean, I agree. I mean, in terms of being a horror, this sticks in the memory as being something that's, when you think about alien antagonists, this is something that when I ask that question, or you got to think about your examples, you think, wow, this is a really memorable and interesting one. Even though it does lean, I guess, a kind of, oh, here's an alien, it's the baddie kind of thing.
Okay, well, how are we going to score this one? It depends what lens we put on the camera, doesn't it?
Well, let's go with the one that you entered away with.
I mean, that's the angle I was coming from.
I kind of curveballed that one in, but I just think that's quite an interest when you're thinking about this laterally, and we're trying to avoid the kind of idea of things being ham-fisted or hackneyed. You've got to consider these angles, right? So
what you're saying is, if the thing played out again, but the thing was actually being friendly, it wouldn't be an issue. Is that what you're saying?
Oh, well, I don't know. I guess that the elements of threat you have in the rest of the film would suffer a little bit if it was just being like, oh, hey.
How would it be saying, oh, hey, if it was like taking things over and sort of like making them monstrous or whatever, but like not killing people, just being like, aha.
Yeah, I definitely feel like there's got to be an edit out there somewhere.
Do you think if it got more lines of dialogue, you'd like it more? If it was a bit more rounded, if it had like a weird quirk, like it really liked peanut butter or something, you'd be on board?
By the way, I feel like we've got to this point without mentioning the version of that, which is a crossover between The Thing and Pingu.
What?
Just The Thing and Pingu. Type that into YouTube and just check it out, guys.
Please tell me it's called Fingu.
It's I think colloquially, yes, it's called Fingu. And oh my God, it's just incredible. So yeah, slightly off topic there, but yeah, it's well worth a watch. It's up there with that RoboCop remake in terms of
oh, what, the penis one?
The penis one, yeah.
You bring all of it to the table. I feel like this is part of like your unofficial role. Like you wear the hat of like weird shit you find around the internet.
I don't even put these out, mate. This is therapy.
As long as you find some catharsis in this, it's all good.
Yeah, you're my Freud. Okay, so yeah, I think we'll give it a point because
he shoots, he scores.
It's a wonderful, wonderfully creepy and
quite original,
interesting. There's nothing else. The things that are out there are similar are clearly sort of derivative from this idea. So it's original in that sense, I think. And it took the original reboot and the original, what was got at in the original story, and really, really developed it in a way that's very cinematically rewarding and satisfying. So yeah, that's a point for The Thing.
A Utropian point.
A Utropian point for definite. Now let's have a look. I think an easy one to try and look at is probably this idea of the MacReady. I know that's the last one you mentioned, but MacReady is the kind of, let's call him the indestructible or the invincible star. We kind of retroactively gave him like star power.
Did he have star power at the time? We just don't know. I mean, dear listener, if you went and watched this film in 1982 and you can inform us as to the level of Kurt Russell power, fantastic.
Because we were near a twinkle in our father's eyes at this point. So, the thing is, I don't know. It is kind of obvious we're going to get to that ending, isn't it? But he's going to see this through to some degree. So, what do you think? Because the ending's an interesting one to talk about in itself.
Yeah, I mean, he's kind of the main protagonist, isn't it? And we kind of sort of mainly follow him, and he sort of assumes the unofficial leader of the sort of resistance band, if you will. I kind of like how it's played, like the character of MacReady, in that, like, Kurt Russell is a good-looking guy. They don't play on that. He is sort of brave, but sort of fallible. And he's kind of believable in sort of his activity. Maybe, the J and B plays into some as well when he's maybe being a little bit irrational.
Yeah, he's like this drunken pilot, isn't he? More than kind of like an action hero in the way that we sort of often associate with, Snake Plissken or a character like that.
I need your clothes, your boots, and you to subscribe to the Trope Stormers podcast. Do it now!
But I mean, it is very it's obvious and it is predictable that we're going to end up with him at the end of a film. I mean, it's not like Samuel L. Jackson in Deep Blue Sea, who does very early on in a way that you don't really see coming.
Yeah. I'm trying to think when there's instances, because there's a thing called plot armor, isn't there? Where a lot of that happened in sort of Game of Thrones. You had this idea of a character's got to meet this certain group of people or a person or achieve a certain thing.
So nothing bad will happen to them.
So nothing bad, or if it is going to be bad, they'll get out of it. Whereas, do we think there's any sort of? I do think that the closest person I think that kind of you find that's important, I suppose, is the idea of Wilford Brimley's scientist. He's the one who kind of makes the discovery, and then once we get past the point that he's served his use, he doesn't have that. We need one of the scientists to make the discovery. So
he's pretty expendable past that point, isn't he?
Yeah. So it's that kind of thinking. Like, we know that somebody has got to be the sort of action man to hold the flamethrower, to set the bombs, to detonate the detonator.
It would have been a very different movie if it had been the nerdy science guy, like, doing all of that.
If it was Bennings at the end, with his comb over and his petri dishes, like it wouldn't have had the same.
It wouldn't have been cool, would it?
No, because there is a fair bit of action at the end of this.
There's a lot of explosions.
Yeah.
Little factoid. Apparently, Kurt Russell came surprisingly close to hurting himself. Because there's that scene where he basically chucks a stick of dynamite at someone who is the thing, and he's got a flamethrower as well. Apparently, it was a real stick of dynamite used in that scene.
Oh my god!
And because I knew this, and I was watching out for it. When you watch it again, like when there's the explosion goes off, not long after he chucks it. Like, if he timed that wrong, it could have been a very different film.
You just got to hope this wasn't first day of shooting.
Yeah, so how are we feeling about that? The indestructible star. I mean, it's something that crops up a lot.
Yeah, I don't know whether it's sort of plot, like indestructible, or like plot armor, or where I'm going with it, but it doesn't sit quite right with me in that sense, because you kind of know there's got to be an action guy at the end, and Childs is kind of built up as too much of an antagonist, and
you don't know that he's actually even going to turn up at the end, or if he's going to feature again, or you're not really invested in him, are you?
No, well, yeah, that's the key thing. You're actively told to invest or shown to invest in Mac's character. You're shown his little part of the base where he lives. He's given some comedy lines. He's given a really important role in terms of doing the blood test.
Yeah, sort of extraneous personality quirks, like sort of chess computers.
That's right. Yeah, he's given a bit more character development. Therefore, I think we're supposed to sort of, and not that's a bad thing, but I think if we're being truthful, we don't like to know, especially in a film like this, who is going to be there at the end.
Not when there's such an integral part of like the whole suspicion and everything, isn't it? Like it's almost like you're kind of like, wow, it can't be Kurt Russell. He's kind of like, he gets a bye, doesn't he? He's kind of like, he'll save the day, it'll be fine.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, that, because how much are we doing it retroactively? We just don't know. But for this one, we're going to have to bring it up to a draw with the alien presence for a dystopian point. Okay, so that leaves us with lone survivor, ambiguous ending, and the idea of the kind of suspicious minds, that idea of we're caught in a trap and it could be any one of us. If I take that idea of it could be any one of us, you've seen this in this kind of ideas, like Among Us has come out recently, hasn't it? Where you've got players being sus and stuff like that, and that's kind of derived very obviously from this type of film, I think. that idea of there being an imposter.
Yeah, my mind immediately went to Reservoir Dogs, weirdly. That scene with Pink and Mr. Blonde, where they're like trying to figure out who the rat is.
Yeah. So I guess, I don't know, it's quite a stereotypical sort of overused statement, isn't it? That idea of it could be any one of us. But if you think about that statement, my mind goes to this movie.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's used quite a lot in this sort of style of film, where you're facing like this ambiguous sort of enemy. So sort of it could be any one of us thing. That scene, though, the tension in that scene, the blood test scene, I mean, it almost makes it all worthwhile because it's such a good scene. It's so tense. It felt original. Like, it didn't feel like a contrivance in the way that maybe a lot of films could, because they're trying to emulate that sort of a scene. Because I think all's film, they've got this, it could be anyone. There has to be sort of a vehicle where they can sort of test who it might be. And there's got to be a sort of a running the gamut, hasn't it? Like they do the tests. Like it happens in The Faculty, if you remember that film.
Oh God, yeah, I love that film.
Yeah, where they all like have to. I can't remember what it is, but some sort of thing. They sniff this substance, which what turns out kills the weird alien things. But the weird alien thing is among them and sort of fakes sniffing the thing, so they believe that person is human rather than alien.
Yeah,
and we've got that kind of like, what's it called when the audience knows something that the characters don't? Dramatic irony.
That's the one.
Yeah, and so that plays out really well in that scene. But that scene, you could say, is almost lifted from the thing, or is heavily influenced from the thing. So yeah, I mean, the Suspicious Minds is just, it's very interwoven into this film. The paranoia, the anxiety, the lack of trust, and bringing out like irrational behavior in people, and it just sort of heightens everything, I think, and is probably quite an accurate. You wonder how this would play out in real life. I think people would be even more suspicious, like potentially.
Okay, so it's an integral part of why this film works. Is that fair to say?
I think it's a massively balled up in it. Yeah.
Okay, so it's not like a sort of straight out of lifted out something like The Mousetrap or like a murder mystery where it's that kind of. Well, the difference with, I suppose, with something like that is that you haven't got the added factor of the alien that can be anything at any one time in those situations. You more or less know that the murderer is going to be one individual in those situations, or
Colonel Mustard with the candlestick in the cellar.
They need to do a mashup of The Thing and Cluedo. Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah, it was Professor Plum with the dog tentacles in the kennels. Okay, well, for that joke alone, it's getting a point for me because it led us to that point. So
2-1, he takes the lead with its Utropianness.
So now we come to the kind of the ending, I guess, and this idea of an ambiguous ending. Now, you said we covered this in kind of Blade Runner, and I think Blade Runner scored quite well with this. Mm-hmm. I guess you've also got the idea that we know that Mac's going to be here to the very end. We've already talked about the idea that they don't survive, and we've talked about the idea of why is that they're basically they're trying to, the humans that remain are trying to save the human race from replication. And I don't know. Do you want to talk us through this a little bit?
I don't think it crops up a lot. I mean, the films that we mentioned is a fairly short list, and I did look, like, trying to think of and also search the internet for examples. And I think it's good because it's not the kind of everything was wrapped up neatly in a bow, all the different threads were pulled together. And I like this idea that there's a community online that are debating that this, what happened, and people come up with their own theories, whether they're real or imagined. And if you were to ask John Carpenter what how he thought the ending was and what happened to the characters, maybe it'd be completely different again. Maybe it'd be something no one had thought of. So I kind of like that ambiguity because it kind of, some people would really hate it, and I think there's a way of doing ambiguity, and I think it was a bit of a trend in the noughties with typically films that feature Bill Murray, like Broken Flowers, Lost in Translation.
Yeah.
You know, there's a friend of mine, like those films, he absolutely hates them because to him they're just pointless jaunts of nothingness, whereas they're, to a lot of people, they're like little vignettes in people's lives that don't need to necessarily have a beginning, a middle, and an end. You're just following a character for a portion, and that's enough for some people. I mean, that's what Wes Anderson's films are basically. All of them are those. And in a way, maybe that's what we've got with The Thing. You know, we've followed it from crazy Norwegians trying to shoot a dog to two people left after a lot of explosions. You know, we don't know how this is going to end. Invent your own ending. I kind of like it. I'm not going to lie. It didn't leave me like frustrated and being like, oh, well, you've got to end it. How can you finish it like that? Oh, this is rubbish. I don't want any part to do this. Oh, that was a waste of... I mean, that's the thing. I didn't feel like it was a waste of time. I didn't come away thinking, well, I'm not going to get that 109 minutes back. I was just like, oh, man. I was kind of more like, oh, my God, what would I do in that position? Sort of
That's
thing.
quite a compelling argument, I must admit, you know, for all my devil's advocacy this evening. And you also highlight there's quite an interesting sort of cycle, is we've got this ambiguous kind of opening at the start where there's two Norwegian guys in a helicopter chasing a dog. You've got this sort of explanation to some degree, but not everything. And then we end kind of equally ambiguously as well. So in that sense, it's...
And also, we're going on the science of one scientist who seems to have an incredibly powerful computer for the 1980s on a research station in far-flung northern Canada. Like, doesn't he basically ask it some questions like, so is this thing going to wipe out the human race? Yes. You know, it was kind of like the computer in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, where they're like, well, what's the meaning of life? No, it's 42. I just thought that that was always a trope in and of itself, like an outrageously powerful computer for the early 80s in the middle of nowhere, able to answer questions of that magnitude based on very little information.
Well, it's a good job that it scored well on that, because it looked like we were about to pan it for some 80s kind of technological hang-ups, a lot like we did with the rubbish car in Time Cop.
Well, where we got all the way to the end, it was like, yeah, we can't let it win because of that car.
His car's a bit shit, or his computer's not realistic.
But the Homer car, no, I'm out.
Okay, so it's looking like with a score of, well, by my reckoning, it's like 3-1.
I think that maths tallies.
Mac as a character, you're Mac ready. You were nearly Mac ready to upset the apple cart, but you didn't. So it's a Utropia for The Thing. So, you know, whoever you are and whatever form you're taking, congratulations.
The Trope Stormers have reached a verdict. Utropia.
How are you feeling, Jim? Because I feel like with this film is obviously up close to your heart, and whenever we do a film that's close to the heart on Trope Stormers, there is always that worry of like, oh God, am I going to pan a film I love? Am I going to find things which I hadn't really thought about before, and it just ruins the whole enjoyment of this film for me? I mean, it hasn't happened here, obviously, but we don't pull punches, and we have actually voted down things we love in the past.
Yeah, this wasn't. I think that's why when you're the sort of curveball alien questions, I do think that this is the sort of thing writers have to think about, I suppose, isn't it? It's the idea of how much are we pandering towards kind of sort of stereotypical tropes and things like that. So I try to think like that as much as possible, and then we genuinely don't know where this is going to go. We just don't know where this is going to go until we do it.
We have no idea. There's no pre-planning to any of us.
No, and we'll fight you if you say otherwise.
I'm going to say now, though, I'm glad that it didn't go to a tie break, because do you know what my auxiliary trope was going to be? Oh,
I'm edge of my seat.
And I don't know how well you would be able to, for all of the your sleufiness tonight in holding a mirror up to my own folly and pointing out the obvious, how would you have got on with the Scooby-Doo let's all split up gang trope?
Oh, well, that is a bit of a cardinal sin, isn't it?
I only mention it now in a safe space of having made a decision, because that's almost Mary Jane-esque.
Oh, well, yeah, there's a lot of people just sat on their own, just doing experiments by themselves. So yeah, I guess one thing is you would just kind of just immediately either just band together, in which case it would probably just morph you into one big blob or something, or you'd just be like, it's the original social distancing, isn't it? That's what it would be original. Like,
wow, a socially distanced remake of The Thing.
Yeah, it's an allegory for modern times.
and
right.
on that bombshell.
Stay safe, everybody. That was Trope Stormers.
It was, and we'd love to hear from you, dear listener. We are on the social medias. We are at Trope Stormers across the various social medias, and we've left it very late in the podcast, Jim, to make our big announcement.
Oh, the launch of the new website and lots of new art. So we have tropestormers.com. It's got new colours. There's black on there. There's red on there.
And white, and those are basically the three colours. I went heavily for the Sif branding of the dark side.
Yeah, a year in, and the graphic designer of the pod pulled rank.
I feel like we should keep the other one. No, there's like a Space Jam style thing to float through the cosmos of the internet for future generations.
So yeah, I'll leave that one to share with my dad, because he's the one. So it's a little bit sort of past it. We'll leave that one out there to share with him. So we've got Brian Stormers. .net, which is the archaic one for our sister podcast, The Half-Life of Brian, and then we also have our new all singing or dancing brand new tropestormers.com, where you'll find all sorts of information on there, links to all the other social media, and we're going to put up some blog posts and things like that as well, so a little bit of extra content there for you.
Sizzle, is that what we call it? Bit of sizzle?
Yeah, it's a little bit of sizzle there for all the film lovers and all the trope nauts out there and future trope nauts.
Nice. If we keep saying trope nauts, it's definitely going to become a thing.
Definitely going to catch on.
Mm-hmm. All the kids will be saying it in the playground, or the ones that are allowed in playgrounds.
Okay, well, thanks for listening. Happy New Year, everyone.
Happy New Year.
As we always say, well,
I think you just did it, didn't you?
Yeah. That's going in.
Okay.
So, do you want to finish this up?
No.
My mouth's not working.
Fantastic. Well, as we always say here on Trope Stormers,
You gotta be fucking shitting me. Bye for now.
Goodbye for now.